I was a landlord for 2 years, and I just want to share some of the common mistakes that I see new landlords make so that you don't have to make these mistakes yourself. And if you are new to the channel, my name's Justin You're, and I've helped hundreds of people make money in real estate. So the first mistake that I see new landlords make is not screening their tenants properly enough. Like, I see a lot of new landlords screen their tenants, but they don't really do it properly in the sense of like, they don't check enough. And of course, the amount of screening that you do does depend on personality type and how much you actually want to vet your tenant. But in my experience, it really helps to do 5 things for screening. The first is make sure they make enough income. Now, the amount of income they make, it really depends on the situation. So for me, at least what I've done is I just want to make sure that the tenant or the applicant makes at least 3 times what the monthly rent is gross. So for example, if the rent is $1,000 and they make $3,000 a month in gross, so like you see their pay stubs and you verify their pay stubs that they're making $3,000 every single month, it's at least 3 times what the rent is. So they're making $3,000, the rent is $1,000. And that's a pretty good safe margin so that if anything bad happens in their life, they're still either making enough money or they have enough funds to support their rent. So that's kind of why we look at 3 times the rent, but that's just what I've done. And really the only way you can verify is to actually check their pay stubs or whatever payments that they have. Like maybe they're independent contractors, they don't have pay stubs, but they have something else like checks or proof or receipts or something like that. But usually if you're gonna be looking at someone with a pay stub, you just wanna make sure you have at least the last 2 months of pay stubs to verify that they're actually making the income that they say they make. So do not just rely on whatever they say on the application. Like if you have someone submit an application to be a renter for you and they're like, oh, I make 10K a month. And then you're like, cool, 10K a month, that's enough. The rent's only 1,000, you're good. Don't do that. Like actually check their pay stubs, ask them, hey, can you send me your pay stubs? And then you could even verify that they work there by calling their employer as it gets closer to you accepting them. So that's at least what I did. So whenever I had a tenant, I've only been a landlord for 2 years, but anytime I had a tenant and I saw their pay stubs and I was about ready to accept them, I would call their employer or I just at least email them or something and just ask them like, hey, does this person work here still? Like, are they actually here? And the employer just kind of confirm like, yep, thumbs up, like they're still here. They do make this amount, you're good to go. Make sure you do that. You don't want to be in the position where you're renting to someone who doesn't actually make the money that they say they make. The second thing I look at when screening a tenant is the credit score. Now, a lot of people don't even look at credit score, but I do. And the reason why I do look at someone's credit score is because I just want to make sure that they're reliable at paying people back. Like if they're using credit cards, I want to make sure that they have a history of paying those credit cards back every single month. It just shows that someone's responsible with money. That's why I look at it. And specifically for me, I want to make sure they have a credit score of at least 650. So like a FICO score, just a credit score. I don't even know what it stands for, but federal, I don't know. It's a FICO score, but whatever their credit score is, I just want to make sure it's at least 650. And the reason why I came to that number is I noticed that a lot of banks, like when people get home loans, they often require a credit score of at least 650. I just see that kind of across the board in general. So if it's good enough with all these big banks, it's good enough for me. So that's just kind of how I determined it. It's kind of arbitrary. I'm not saying this is the right way to do it. I'm just saying this is what I've done and it's made me feel really, really secure about all the tenants I've gotten. The third thing I look in screening a tenant is the background check. So I want to make sure that the applicant has no history of any felonies or anything like that. Maybe misdemeanors I'm okay with, like little criminal activities, but preferably I like to have someone who's, clean, who has no felonies, misdemeanors, no kind of crimes, because I don't want crime to be involved with my property. So I do a background check, and there's a lot of websites you can do this from. Like back when I did it, I used cozy.co, and it was just a website for landlords who are able to screen tenants. And actually you're able to use that website to collect rent too. So that was just something that I use as a landlord. I don't use it today. I know there's other things like Azebo, and none of this stuff is sponsored. So no one's telling me to say this. This is just stuff that I've used and I've seen it work really well. The fourth thing I look at in the screening process is a clean background with the references. So all their prior landlords, I want to make sure I call them and make sure that they're actually good tenants just by hearing the feedback from their past landlords, and not just looking and calling their last landlord or their current landlord, because chances are if you're just calling their current landlord, there's a good chance that that landlord is just trying to get them out of the house. So they might say that they're great tenants even if they're not. So just make sure you call all the previous landlords and ask them like, how were they as tenants and would you rent to them again? That's probably the biggest question to ask is, hey, would you rent to this person again if you could? And if they say yes, that's a pretty good indicator that it's a good tenant. So just ask basic questions to get an idea of, hey, what kind of person is this, from all their references of past landlords. And the fifth thing to look at is you can also figure this out from the background check and from also checking with the landlords. But the fifth most important thing is no prior evictions, like never an eviction. If you ever rent out to someone who has had an eviction in the past, there's a good chance that they're a problematic tenant and they're gonna do the same exact thing to you. So just make sure, do not rent to someone with an eviction. There are so many more people out there, and if you can't find any, it's likely that you have your application or your rental listed for way too high of a price, so you're not getting enough people actually applying. So just make sure that you have your rental rate at a fair rate so that you're actually getting good applicants and you're not having to resort to getting people with past prior evictions. Now, the second biggest mistake that I see with new landlords is not having a strong enough lease. I'm just gonna tell you my experience of like making the lease myself and stuff like that. Like in my past, whenever I've had a tenant or been a landlord, I actually did create the lease myself. So I drafted it by just doing a copy and paste from Google, but then I had an attorney actually review it and make adjustments and revisions to add like certain legal wording in it to make sure that I was protected. Because honestly, like the whole point of a lease and having a strong contract is for when things go wrong and they go bad. Like if everything's going well, like you don't even need to worry about the lease. But when things are going bad, that's when both parties, you, the tenant, whoever's involved, go back to the lease and say, okay, like who's in the wrong or who's in the right. So make sure you have a really strong lease just to prepare for when things go bad. And you can totally go the route of like you making the own lease yourself, which I did, but I also did have an attorney review it. So you could either make it yourself, have an attorney review it, or if you're feeling really, really risky, and I don't recommend this, you could also just not have the attorney review it and do it. It's not what I recommend, like not what I recommend at all. What I do recommend is either you draft it, have an attorney review it, fix it up, or just have an attorney draft it in the first place and have them make it for you. Yes, it's gonna cost a lot more money than if you did it yourself and never checked with an attorney, but honestly, like the little amount of money that you would pay for having an attorney help you draft a strong lease could be well worth it for if you ever got in trouble, and you could use that lease for all your future rentals. So just for the first one, like think of it as like a one-time investment to have it reviewed by a legal professional, and from there, you're pretty set. And again, this is just my own personal opinion and from my own experience. I've just seen things go wrong, and I wanted to make sure that I had a strong lease for when things went wrong, and I was super grateful that I did have a strong lease for when things went wrong. So make sure you have a strong lease. The third biggest mistake that I see newbie landlords make is not preparing or budgeting enough for maintenance and repairs and for capital expenditures. So let me kind of break that down for you. Maintenance and repairs are just like the little things that you have to do with a house to fix it up. So like maybe the sink breaks or the faucet, or like little things around the house break. And you as a landlord typically are the one in charge of making those repairs. And these little things, they really start to add up over time. So a lot of new real estate investors or new landlords, they think that whatever your rent is, like maybe your rent is $1,200 and you know your mortgage is $1,000. They think that your monthly cash flow will be $200, like the difference between the $1,200 rent and the $1,000 mortgage. So they think that $200, that's your cash flow, that's your profit every single month. When in reality, that is not the case. The real situation is that over time, it's kind of like hidden expenses that you don't know and you're not aware of if you're just starting out. But all these little maintenance and repairs, all these sink fixes, all these little tiny things, they add up over time and they eat into that profit. So that $200 monthly cash flow or that monthly profit that you think you're making, it's really a lot less because of all these maintenance and repair expenses. And a lot of people get caught up in how much you should even budget for this type of thing, and it really depends on the condition of the home. Like if it's a newer home, you can expect there won't be as much repairs and maintenance, but if it's an older home, you can expect for there to be a lot more. Now, a safe number in general, like you can budget anywhere between 5 and 10% of the monthly rent. So if your monthly rent is $1,000 and you budget 5%, you're budgeting $50 every single month for maintenance and repairs. And it's not to say that you're gonna have $50 of expenses every single month. Usually it's like no expenses for 2 months, a big expense like $200 the third month, no expenses for a few more months. Like that's kind of how it works. But in general, you're budgeting $50 a month on average to estimate and prepare for when things go wrong. So when you buy the home and then have all these different repairs and maintenance, you're not surprised because you already budgeted for it at the very beginning. Now, the same thing applies for something called capital expenditures. Now, these are the big ticket items. These are like your water heater breaking or your HVAC unit, which is like your AC unit or heating unit, or like anything big that you can think of, like a roof expense. So these are the big ticket items that typically don't happen every single month. They happen after years and years of wear and tear, but you still have to budget for these things because they totally eat into the profit as well, just like the repairs and maintenance. And it also depends on the condition of the home, how new or how old it is. But the point is, you want to budget for something. Budget using a percentage of the rent amount, either 5 to 10% or more, depending on how old the home is. And you should be pretty safe at estimating a good amount to budget for capital expenditures. Also, if you want help to grow your real estate business, click on the link in the description, fill out the form, and someone from my team will reach out to you for a free strategy session. Peace.